All right, welcome back everyone to the deep dive. We're diving into a topic today that I think, well, pretty much everyone can relate to on some level.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's one of those universal things, isn't it?
Exactly, time management. But what we really want to unpack is how these strategies, the ones we hear about all the time for getting organized and all that,
Right.
how they can be adapted for people who experience ADHD.
It's such a crucial area to look at because so often the typical advice it doesn't take into account the way different brains work.
Totally. And, what we're learning more and more is that ADHD often involves some differences in how executive functions operate. These are like the brain's, well, you can think of them like a command center.
Okay.
They help us plan things out, get organized, prioritize, and then, and this is the big one, actually follow through on those tasks.
Yeah, that's often the biggest hurdle, isn't it?
It is. And it's important to emphasize that it's not about a lack of willpower or anything like that.
Absolutely.
It's really about how the brain is wired.
Yeah. It's about those neurological differences, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And a key factor here is this concept called time blindness.
Right. It's not as widely understood as it should be.
It's this, well, it's a difficulty in accurately sensing how much time is actually passing and how long something will really take.
It can make deadlines and commitments really tricky to navigate.
It's not about being intentionally late or just disregarding deadlines.
Not at all. What research is showing is that it's actually linked to the activity in the prefrontal cortex and how dopamine pathways function.
Dopamine, that's the reward chemical, right?
Right. It plays a role in motivation and reward. And when those pathways are disrupted, it can impact the brain's ability to register the passage of time accurately.
I see. So those deadlines and things, they might feel sort of abstract until all of a sudden they're right there.
Exactly. And that can lead to a lot of stress and frustration, understandably.
Absolutely. And it's not just the cognitive stuff, right? Like how the brain perceives time.
No, you're right. Emotional regulation plays a huge role here, too.
Okay, so how does that tie in?
Well, individuals with ADHD can experience really intense emotions.
Right.
Impulsivity, frustration, and these things can easily derail even the best laid plans, even if someone really wants to stick to a schedule.
So then, how can people adapt time management techniques to work with the ADHD brain, instead of constantly feeling like they're fighting against it?
Well, there are a number of approaches that can be helpful. One that's widely known is the Pomodoro technique.
Okay, I've heard of that one. Remind me how that works.
Sure. So the Pomodoro technique is all about breaking your work down into focused chunks, usually about 25 minutes each. And then you separate those by short breaks.
So little bursts of work with breaks in between?
Exactly. And the name actually comes from, those tomato-shaped kitchen timers.
Yeah.
That's what Francesco Scirillo, the guy created this technique, he used one of those. Pomodoro is Italian for tomato. And usually after you do 4 of these work intervals, you take a longer break.
Okay, I see. So the idea of these really focused work periods, that seems like it could be really helpful for tackling those big tasks that can feel overwhelming.
Absolutely. Breaking it down like that can really help people overcome that initial hurdle of getting started. And for folks with ADHD, it can be even more effective to experiment with, maybe even shorter work intervals, like maybe 15 or 20 minutes.
Oh, interesting. So shorter bursts, but more frequent breaks.
Right. And those breaks can involve some movement, a sensory break, whatever helps them regulate their focus. And something else that's really important with this technique is using a timer.
A timer.
Yeah.
Okay. Is a visual timer especially important?
Yes, especially for someone with time blindness, having that visual representation, actually watching the time countdown, can make a huge difference in their awareness of how much time is left.
So it becomes less of this abstract thing. It's like, okay, I can see it ticking away.
Exactly. It makes it more concrete, more manageable. And another important part of the Pomodoro technique is minimizing interruptions.
Oh, right. Shutting out distractions during those work sprints.
Yeah, and if something does pop up, you just jot it down to deal with later.
Okay, that makes sense.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you can stay in that focus zone.
And even if someone's in a hyper-focus mode, which can happen with ADHD, the timer can act as a reminder to take a break.
Which is important, yeah, to avoid burning out. I've
Yeah.
definitely experienced that. So moving on, what about the Eisenhower matrix?
The Eisenhower matrix.
I've also heard this called the urgent important matrix.
Right. Both names work. It's basically a framework for prioritizing your tasks based on, how urgent they are and how important they are.
Okay, so you end up with 4 categories.
That's right. 4 quadrants. You've got the urgent and important tasks. Those are the ones that need immediate attention.
Those are the can't wait ones.
Exactly. Then there's not urgent, but important. These are the tasks that contribute to your long-term goals.
So important, but not a fire drill.
Exactly. Then we have urgent but not important. These are often other people's priorities. They can feel pressing, but they might not actually align with your goals.
Oh yeah, those can be tricky to navigate.
And finally, there's not urgent and not important. These are basically time wasters.
Okay, so like if I spend an hour answering emails instead of working on that report that's due tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. The heart of this matrix is recognizing the difference between urgent, meaning time sensitive, and important, meaning contributes to your big picture goals. There's this thing called the mere urgency effect.
Interesting term.
It basically means we tend to gravitate toward those urgent tasks, even if they're not actually that important in the grand scheme of things. The Eisenhower matrix helps you step back and assess both urgency and importance, and the actions for each quadrant are pretty straightforward.
So urgent and important, you do those right away.
Yep. Not urgent but important, you schedule those for later.
Yeah.
Urgent but not important, you try to delegate those if possible.
And not urgent and not important, you just eliminate them.
As much as you can, yes. It's a simple system, but it can be really helpful in cutting through that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And I've heard that using labels or different priority levels in digital task managers can be a good way to visually represent this matrix.
Yes, having that visual organization can really help. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule.
Ah, the 80-20 rule. Classic. So how does this apply to time management, especially for someone with ADHD?
Well, the 80-20 rule basically says that roughly 80% of your outcomes come from about 20% of your efforts.
Okay.
For people with ADHD who might have, variable focus and energy levels, this principle can be really helpful. It's about identifying and focusing on that 20% of tasks that are going to make the biggest impact on their goals.
So instead of trying to do everything, you focus your energy where it matters most.
Right. So how do you figure out what those high impact tasks are?
It takes some reflection. You need to think about your most important goals and then which specific tasks, if you complete them, will really move the needle on those goals. Once you've identified those vital few tasks, the key is to prioritize them, especially during those times when your focus is naturally at its peak.
Makes sense, right? Align your most important work with the times you're most likely to be able to focus on it. And what about the other 80% of tasks, the ones that aren't those vital few?
Well, according to the 80-20 rule, those are likely contributing less to your overall progress. So the idea is to either delegate those tasks if you can, or eliminate them altogether. This frees up time and mental energy.
It's like strategically pruning your to-do list.
Exactly. Now let's talk about distractions. These are a challenge for everyone, but especially for people with ADHD.
Yeah, distractions can be a huge drain on productivity.
So what are some practical strategies for limiting distractions, especially in the context of ADHD?
Well, one of the key things is to create a dedicated workspace.
Like a designated spot where you go to focus.
Yes, and that space should be as free from distractions as possible, both visual and auditory. So a quiet location, minimal clutter, keep only the essential items within reach.
Okay, so minimizing visual clutter, finding a quiet spot. That makes sense. What about noise? I know a lot of people struggle with that.
Yeah, noise can be a big one. Noise-canceling headphones can be really helpful, or even just playing some white noise. And then there's the digital distractions.
Oh yeah, the constant notifications, social media, all of that.
For those, it can be really helpful to utilize website blockers and turn off notifications on your devices.
Basically creating a distraction-free digital environment.
Exactly. Also, letting people know when you're working and asking them not to interrupt you can be really helpful.
Setting those boundaries, yeah.
And don't forget about taking breaks. Regular breaks are essential for preventing burnout and maintaining focus over time.
They really are. Okay, let's move on to a technique called time boxing. Can you explain what that is?
Time boxing is about, it's about assigning specific blocks of time in your calendar to particular tasks.
So you're basically scheduling time for your tasks.
Exactly. It turns those abstract to-dos into concrete appointments in your schedule.
Okay, I like that. So it's like saying from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. I'm working on this report.
Yep, that's it. And by giving each task a definite time frame, it creates a sense of urgency and helps you focus your energy during that time.
I see how that would be helpful.
And if you have a large task, you can break it down into smaller time boxes. This makes the whole thing feel less overwhelming. Using a timer within each time box can also help. And you can actually combine time boxing with the Pomodoro technique, so you're using those focused work intervals within the larger time block.
Oh, that's a cool idea. Okay, now let's talk about the pickle jar theory. This is a really interesting analogy.
The pickle jar theory, I love this one. It's a great way to visualize prioritization.
So how does it work?
Imagine you have a pickle jar.
Okay.
This jar represents your time. It's a finite amount. Then you have rocks. These represent your most important tasks, the big rocks.
Okay, the important stuff.
Then there are pebbles. These represent the tasks that are important but not as urgent. And then you have sand. This is all the little stuff, the distractions, the things that can easily fill up your time. And some versions of this also include water, representing personal life and rest.
Okay, I see. So the order you put things in the jar matters.
Yes, you put the big rocks in first because those are the most important. You make sure they get in the jar, then you fit the pebbles around them, and then you pour the sand in to fill up the gaps.
So you prioritize the most important things first.
Right. And the water reminds you to also make time for your personal life, for rest, to avoid burnout.
That's a great analogy. It makes it so clear. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different techniques and strategies. Can you summarize some of the key action steps people can take?
Sure. First, start each day by identifying your big rocks, those top 1 to 3 most important tasks.
Okay.
Then, use the Eisenhower matrix to categorize all your tasks by urgency and importance.
Break them down into those 4 quadrants.
Exactly. And then break down those big rocks and any other large tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. Schedule time boxes for those smaller steps and use the Pomodoro technique with a timer within those time boxes. It can also be really helpful to write down any distractions that pop up so you can deal with them later.
Okay, so you're not getting derailed by them in the moment.
Right. Also, try to work on those big rock tasks during your peak focus times. Create that distraction-free environment we talked about. Take regular breaks and plan ahead at the end of each day for the next.
That's a lot of good stuff.
There's more. Building in some buffer time before appointments and deadlines can be a lifesaver.
Yes, that's so important.
And designate specific places for things you use often so you don't waste time searching for them. Oh, and learn to say no. You don't have to say yes to every request.
That can be hard for some people.
It is, but it's a crucial skill. And finally, review your task list regularly and make adjustments as needed. And make sure you schedule personal time for rest and rejuvenation. That's essential for long-term well-being and productivity.
It sounds like a lot, but it's really about building those habits over time.
Right. It's a process.
Now, before we wrap up, let's talk about digital tools.
Oh yeah, technology can be a huge help with time management.
What are some tools that can be particularly helpful for people with ADHD?
There are calendar apps like Google Calendar and Outlook Calendar. These can help with visual scheduling and reminders.
Okay.
There are task management apps like Todoist and Trello. These offer digital lists, visual boards, and ways to prioritize your tasks. Then you have focus apps and website blockers like Freedom and Forest.
Those can be lifesavers, especially when you're trying to focus on something important.
Totally. And then there are timer apps, including visual timers, which can be great for structuring work intervals. And co-working apps like FocusMate can provide a sense of accountability, which can be really helpful for some people.
So there are lots of options out there.
Tons. The key is to experiment and find what works best for you.
Now, building sustainable habits is key to long-term success. What advice would you give on how to do that?
Start small. Don't try to change everything overnight.
That's good advice in general.
Be patient with yourself. Setbacks are normal. Find an accountability partner, someone you can check in with and support each other. And review and adjust your strategies regularly, because what works best for you might change over time. It can also be helpful to link new habits to existing routines. And don't forget about taking care of yourself.
Yeah, that's so important.
Get enough sleep, eat well, exercise regularly. These things have a big impact on your executive function and therefore your ability to manage your time effectively. And if you're struggling, don't hesitate to seek professional support from an ADHD coach or therapist. They can offer personalized strategies and guidance.
That's great advice. Finally, let's talk about procrastination.
Oh, procrastination, the arch nemesis of productivity.
So what's the science behind procrastination and what are some strategies for overcoming it?
Research suggests that procrastination isn't just about being lazy or irresponsible. It's a natural human tendency. It's often described as a battle between the limbic system, which is the part of our brain that wants immediate pleasure and avoids discomfort, and the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for planning and decision-making.
Oh, so like the pleasure center versus the planning center.
Exactly. And the limbic system, being the more primitive part of our brain, often wins out.
I see.
Interestingly, some people actually get a rush of adrenaline and dopamine when they complete tasks at the last minute, which can reinforce the procrastination habit.
So it's like they're getting rewarded for procrastinating.
In a way, yes. True self-control involves both of those brain regions working together in a more balanced way. The amygdala, which is the part of our brain that processes emotions, can also play a role. Sometimes it triggers a fight or flight response to tasks that feel overwhelming, leading to avoidance.
So it's like our brain is trying to protect us from stress.
Exactly. But the problem is, chronic procrastination can have a lot of negative consequences. It can lead to wasted time, missed opportunities, lower self-esteem, and poorer decision-making.
Not to mention all the stress and anxiety it causes.
Right. Some people even talk about good versus bad procrastination.
What's the difference?
Well, sometimes delaying a task can actually lead to better focus later on, or it might allow you to prioritize more strategically. But it becomes bad procrastination when it consistently leads to stress and missed deadlines.
So it's about finding that balance.
Yes, exactly. So how do you break the cycle of procrastination? Some effective strategies include acknowledging the habit without judgment, trying to understand why you procrastinate, using rewards to motivate yourself, finding an accountability partner, and setting consequences for not completing tasks. It can also be helpful to remind yourself of the real cost of wasted time.
So it's about becoming more aware of your patterns and finding strategies that work for you.
Yes. And there are some really interesting insights from people who've successfully managed their procrastination. Some people find it helpful to attach a specific mode or mindset to certain types of tasks. Others design their weekly schedule around their natural energy levels throughout the day. Some break down large tasks into smaller, more manageable steps. And some even use mindfulness practices like meditation to improve focus and reduce overwhelm.
So many different approaches.
And a key element is often learning to say no, not overcommitting yourself. Evaluating whether new tasks are really worth your time and energy, and making sure that the things you're doing align with your bigger goals.
That's all really helpful advice.
The bottom line is, effective time management with ADHD is achievable. It's about understanding your brain and finding strategies that work for you.
Right, working with your brain, not against it.
Experiment. Use the tools available. Be patient. Be kind to yourself. It's a journey, and finding the right combination of techniques takes time.
So it's about embracing your unique wiring and finding what works for you.
Exactly. And remember, progress and adaptation are key to long-term success.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive into time management, especially in the context of ADHD. Lots of valuable information and practical tips to consider.
I agree.
So, as a final thought, maybe something to ponder would be this. How might understanding your own brain's natural rhythms and tendencies be the key to unlocking truly effective time management? What small, personalized adjustment might you consider trumping today, based on what we've talked about?
That's a great question to reflect on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. It's been a great conversation.
It really has.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time.
See you then.